you can get mortgage approvals for a heck of a lot more than what makes sense for your situation sometimes.
Yeah, that's totally true. Like the amount that you can afford on paper is very, very often a lot more than you probably in reality can afford
or would want to afford.
Or would want to, because you could have the biggest, fanciest house, but if you literally cannot go anywhere, cannot do anything, you're eating ramen noodles, yeah, you can afford it, but it's not comfortable.
But are you living outside of that? No.
Yeah. Welcome to Checks and Balances, the Takeover. This is Jess and Makayla back with another episode. And today we're doing a really practical episode. We're going to talk about a few first home buyer do's and don'ts, because I don't know if you've noticed, but the market is kind of recovering and people are out there looking for houses again.
I think it's definitely a bit of a Kiwi dream, owning your own home. Some people want to own the patch of dirt that they live on. It's not necessarily important to everyone. But, you know, for me, I bought a home because I had experiences of being kicked out by a landlord every year and I got sick of it. And I just wanted to own the box that I'm sat in most of the time.
It wasn't, you didn't buy it because we peer pressured you into buying it?
No. First 4 weeks at Lighthouse, bought a house. No, I had definitely had that on my to-do list for a while. But, you know, it's not for everyone. But for the people that do see this as a goal and being really important to them, we've got some things that we've learned in the buying process that we want to share with you.
So in New Zealand, about 66% of Kiwis now own their own home.
2/3 of people.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. I think it's better than I thought.
I actually thought it would be lower, to be honest, but things are looking up.
Yeah, and buying your first home is going to be one of the biggest financial decisions that you ever make. So we want to make sure that you're getting this right. Actually, in the last 12 months, like Makayla said, things are picking up. $166 million were withdrawn from KiwiSaver funds for first home withdrawals. So you're obviously all out there doing it. So let's make sure we're doing it right.
Exactly. Okay, so should we start with some do's?
Okay, step 1. And especially if you're buying with somebody, sit down and discuss what are your priorities, what are the must-haves, and what are the nice-to-haves.
Yes, especially when it's your first home. We say this all the time. Your first home isn't going to be your forever home in a lot of cases. And I think a lot of people won't want to compromise on certain things because in their head, they're like looking for their dream home, but that's not the stage we're at. You'll get there, but you need to think about the things that are actually like, I have to have this, and the things that you can compromise on. Like, for example, when my husband and I were buying our house, we had a lot of things, like a huge list that we were like, nah, it's got to have that, got to have that, got to have that. And the house we ended up with has none of those things.
Really?
But I think we missed out on a lot of houses that are better than the one we ended up with because we were just, not
being
for
too
us.
picky.
Exactly.
I was going to say, I think before you even do this, actually have a look around at what's out there within your budget so that you actually have a realistic picture of what your non-negotiables could be and what your nice-to-haves could be.
Yeah.
You know, I've got some friends who have just bought as a couple. His non-negotiable was he wants a garage. That was really, really important.
The garage.
Yeah, always
or
the garage. That was really important to him. He spends a lot of time, you know, working on cars and things like that. So that was super key. It did make the house search a lot harder for them, made the process a lot longer than it probably would have been, but it's important to him. So that's what they did. And I think that's been a really important part of the process, is actually making sure you're both clear on what your list looks like and what you're happy to compromise on and what you're not.
Yeah. We do also see a lot of like clients of ours where they maybe haven't had that conversation, and then they're looking at tons and tons of houses and you can't quite figure out why they're not coming to a conclusion on like making an offer or going to an auction. And it's usually because one of them is saying, nah, I don't like that house, but not really communicating why. And the other one's going, but I like this house. And then they're just, you know, you're not moving forward. You're just staying where you are.
Wasting time. This is very much a work smart, not hard tip, I think. Don't waste your weekends looking at houses if you're not going to actually buy it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do budget for your house properly. Like you just said, look at things in the areas you want that are in your price range, because if your budget is $1 million and you're looking at giant houses with swimming pools, probably once you get your pre-approval and you're ready to buy, that's not the kind of houses you're going to be looking at.
No, exactly. And I think a real sneaky part of this process, which a lot of people don't think about, we do see this happen as well with a lot of our clients before we tell them, that people build up their savings and they've been doing a really good job at that and they've got this amazing, deposit ready to go, and you realize that actually all of their money is going to be sucked up by the deposit and they don't have a buffer left over for things like legal fees, valuations, inspections, and whiteware.
Yeah.
So I would say, I'm going to throw some numbers out there, which I just thought, but let's see, because I think you're going to know better than I will. Legal fees, $3,000.
Yeah, about there.
Valuation, $1,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Look at you go.
Yeah. Inspection, $600.
Like a building inspection?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. And whiteware, I know I just spent $1,400 on a new washer dryer. You need like that and a fridge.
Yeah.
Pretty key. So $3,000 easily on that.
That is kind of a funny thing I notice that's different here is that people tend to take, if they can, those things out of the houses when they sell, which is, we just leave them.
Oh, really?
In Canada. Yeah.
Oh, no. I feel like a fridge and washer dryer is a very personal choice.
Also, when I sell, because I think we're going to look at selling our house next year. And when we did our kitchen renovation, it was so difficult to get our double door fridge into the kitchen that it's staying with the house because I don't think we can get it out.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And no, I think most people take them with them because I have specifically chosen my washer dryer to suit my needs. I'm taking that with me.
I also want to go back to the hidden fees for a sec. So valuations especially. So in most cases, you're probably going to need a registered valuation. So I think you should always be budgeting for that because if you don't need it, fabulous. But in most cases, you're going to, especially if you're buying a new build because it's a new house. There's nothing to compare it to. There's no historic value. If you're borrowing over 80%, a lot of the time you're going to need a valuation because the bank's taking on higher risk by lending you more money. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they do need to have that cost in pocket. And then the other thing I'll say about valuations is if you're someone that is attending auctions, a lot of the time you need a valuation up front to confirm how much you're going to bid. And if you lose out at auction, you may find that you're paying for a valuation on the next house as well. So some of these things you might end up paying for more than one, especially as the market heats up and houses start selling faster.
Yeah, that wasn't my experience because I bought last year. So it was pretty chill, but I know when you were buying it was like that.
Yeah, it was not chill.
Not chill. Yeah, exactly. Okay, next one. And I have questions about this for you. Do secure a pre-approval for your mortgage. Sometimes you'll tell people that a live deal is better though, right?
Well, okay. So you should get a pre-approval because that allows you to establish your budget early on, establish what conditions you might need to meet. So when the bank sends an approval to you, they might say, we can approve this much money, but in order for us to do that, you need to maybe close a couple credit cards, or maybe you need to provide them evidence of, who knows, like your visa or something.
Just takes a bit of time.
There's things you have to do. So by getting a pre-approval, you already know those things and there's less hidden things that could jump out at you. That being said, especially right now, a lot of the banks are very, very, very busy, and getting a pre-approval actually takes a little bit longer because they put less priority on those types of applications. If you've already signed an agreement to purchase a house, then the bank is going to look at that faster because they know there's already a contract in hand and that person is very likely to proceed with the purchase and actually settle the money.
Right. Okay. But is there a risk in that is that you could get to that stage and then they do have all these things you need to do in the next 10 days, like 10
That's
15
right.
working
But
days.
that's why if you are entering an agreement, we always ask you to put 10 to 15 working days to confirm that you have finance, because in those 10 to 15 working days, we are submitting it to the bank, finding out what conditions you need to meet, meeting those conditions, and then you're confirming with the vendor, like, 100% unconditionally, I'm going to purchase this house. Right.
Okay. I think this very nicely follows on to our next point, which is surround yourself with people who know what they're doing. And, whether that's us or someone else, just get a team of experts around you. We're talking, You're going to need lawyers, a mortgage advisor. There's absolutely no downside to having a mortgage advisor, somebody who's on your team when you're working through all of the stuff. It's pretty complex. Most people aren't going to do it that many times in their lives. You're not expected to be an expert in this. So find somebody who knows this process, does it day in, day out, and can help you every step of the way.
Yeah. And I think another caveat on the trusted solicitor part, you need oftentimes, especially when you're a first home buyer, you need somebody that knows how a property transaction works. Because if you are just using, the lawyer that your dad used to like sell his business back in 2009, they are probably not going to be specializing in the same space, and they might not be up to date with how everything works currently. So we do find a lot of the times that people are like, yeah, I'm just using this, like family, suggested this to me. And then that solicitor ends up making things actually a lot more difficult than they need to be because they're not up to date on the stuff.
Right. And because if you've got other experts in the mix working with you through this process, like we know lawyers who do this stuff all the time. So we can help you meet other people that can help you.
You want everything to like flow. Like it should kind of be I guess that's kind of what we try and do in here, and a lot of places try and do is like, you have all the experts and they're all talking to each other and they're all helping you.
Exactly. And I would say no matter what experts you approach to help you with this process, I always check Google reviews. Go have a look at the Google reviews, suss them out, have a read through them, just make sure that they look mostly positive. Also, personal recommendations can be a way to go sometimes. Not all the time, sometimes.
And even if you have a really good team around you, do ask all of the questions.
Don't feel bad about harassing an agent because you have lots of questions. You're spending a heck of a lot of money on this purchase. Don't downplay that. If you want to ask a million questions of this person, you absolutely can. And on that, just keep in the back of your mind who the agent is paid by, who they're working for, and it's not you.
Yeah.
But they do have an obligation to answer all of your questions.
If you have a mortgage advisor or, someone in your corner, you can also double check the answers that, maybe you've asked the agent, hey, I noticed that this is plaster clad. Is that all right? And the agent's going to go, hell yeah, it's all right. Don't worry about it. But maybe then you should go to someone else that is on your team and go, hey, the agent said this. What do you think? And they might have a different opinion, and that's valuable to you because then you can kind of weigh it up.
For sure. A few things, if you're looking at new builds, things to ask the developers that I asked were blinds. Like, are you going to get curtains with your house? That seems like a real weird thing to ask, but sometimes they don't come with blinds and curtains, and they can be really, really expensive to put in. So put that on your list. I also asked about things like splashbacks, overhead cupboards in the kitchens. A lot of those things don't actually come with the house. So just make sure you've looked over every little thing and you know that you're going to get exactly what you want when you move in there.
And I think with the new builds, but the existing properties too, there's a lot of questions you could ask, but one that I found myself asking, because earlier this year I was looking at houses, was about the flooding in 2023. Like, if there had been any damage, if there was it repaired? Do you have, reports, whatever? I did have an instance where I asked that question to an agent and he said, nah, there's, no flooding, whatever. And we actually nearly put in an offer. And then when I called up to say, hey, we want to put in an offer, it was a different agent that answered. And she said, oh, yeah, sounds good. Did so-and-so tell you about the flood damage? And I was like, no.
Thank goodness.
What is the flood damage?
Yeah.
And I think she was a little bit embarrassed because obviously they have to tell you these things. And he did not tell me that information. So she then forwarded me all of the information on what had happened. And it had been repaired, but we didn't feel comfortable making the offer anymore. So we didn't. But he could have avoided all that if he just would have been upfront about it.
Before we move on, we talk all the time about planning and growing our wealth, but protecting that wealth is just as important. That's why having the right insurance in place can help when life goes unexpectedly.
And that's why this episode is brought to you by Partners Life, a New Zealand operated award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured and 89% of claims paid.
Partners Life understand that having some insurance is better than having no insurance. They have flexible and personalized solutions for any budget or situation.
Check out their website in our show notes below.
Okay, moving on to the don'ts. So don't overlook hidden maintenance costs. So this is sort of speaking a little bit to what we said before. You can't just focus on the upfront price of the house. Just because you can afford the payment doesn't mean you can afford the purchase. Like sometimes there's associated costs that come with the upfront purchase that you also need to factor into your budget.
I feel like this is things like replacing roofing, do the heat pumps need updating? Sometimes you look at a house and you go, oh, okay, right now, like it's fine, everything's good. But some of those things, for example, the roof might only be a year or two away from needing money spent on it. And oftentimes those can be massive amounts of money. And if you've not got the cash on hand to take on that cost, then you've got to think about, how am I going to pay for this? Because if it is things like the roof or, cladding leaks or I'm trying to think of examples, but you can ask the vendor, hey, I had a building inspection done. It says that the roof is going to be needing repair in a year. Can you please reduce the purchase price for the cost of the repair of the roof so that I can repair it?
Interesting. Yeah, well, there you go.
Or you can also ask them to make those repairs up front if they're imminent enough, and they might agree to do that too.
I think that the other ongoing costs to bear in mind, and this is something that certainly if you're working with a financial advisor, they will flag to you, are rates and insurances.
Oh, yes.
So rates are not cheap. You probably hear homeowners weighing on about this all the time, but rates are pretty phenomenal. They're going up. Particularly in places like Wellington, and insurances, we're talking house and contents, but also your personal insurances, your life, income protection. If you're buying a house with a partner taking on a load of debt, you want to factor in, if one of you were to unfortunately get sick or pass away, what's the other person going to be left with?
What are you going to do about the mortgage?
All the stuff. Are they going to sell the house or, what's the plan? So thinking about all those ongoing costs is also quite important.
With the rates and insurance too, maybe a lot of people, I think, don't realize that those are costs that the bank takes into account when they're assessing you as well. So generally, when we're doing a pre-approval application, we'll make an educated guess on what the rates and insurance are likely to be on the type of property you're looking at. So based on like the area, the size of the houses you're looking at, that kind of stuff. But if you end up purchasing something that is different from what we originally thought about, and the rates are way higher and the insurance is way higher, that can skew your servicing as well.
Right.
So the bank might come back and go, oh, well, I've got a different answer for you now because the rates are $2,000 more than you said they were going to be.
Crikey. Yeah, something to
Which
bear in
happens
mind.
Especially in Wellington, as you said.
Yeah,
the rates there are crazy high.
Crazy high. They must have been I'm sure we've got podcasts about that somewhere. Cool. And so the next don't skip due diligence on the neighborhood. And chances are, if you're from an area, you probably know the neighborhood already and the type of reputation it has. But, checking for things like future development plans, crime rates, accessibility to things like public services, we're talking trains, malls, supermarkets, all that stuff. Make sure you take all that. Schools, actually, that's another important one. Make sure you're checking all that stuff.
A cheap house in like a not so ideal location isn't always a good buy, I will say. We did ages ago when we were looking to buy our house. I looked at this house in Northcote, and it was really cool. It was like a really cool modern kind of house. I don't know. It was neat. Anyway, there was an empty lot next door, and I said to the agent, like, oh, what's happening over there? And he said, oh, they're putting in some townhouses. So immediately we were like, no, I don't want to. And now I drive by that house quite frequently on my way to work, and it is basically completely boxed in with townhouses now.
Right.
So like all the natural light.
So it's towering over. I was going to say, why did you care that there were townhouses? But I think it's because it's like blocking.
You lose your kind of space, right?
Right.
Yeah.
As someone who lives in a townhouse.
And some people might not care about that, but I cared about that.
Yeah, you did. The other thing I noted when I was buying, like we're nice and close to a motorway, which is super handy for getting around. And but I was also quite aware of the noise. So we actually went and sat outside the house. This sounds a bit creepy. We sat outside the house with our windows down. Yeah, with our windows down, and just sat there for like 10 minutes, just listening to the noises in the area. So making sure that we were comfortable with the noise levels being that distance from the motorway.
That is super extra, but I also respect that.
Yeah. Well, if you're going to be relaxing in your backyard, having your barbecues and drinks or whatever, you don't want to be overcome with road noise.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's so funny. Okay. Next one. This really stabs me in the heart because it says, don't rely solely on the vendor's building report.
Okay, what do we mean by this?
Okay, so basically this is when a lot of vendors will get a building inspection done on the house and they will provide that as part of the related property documents. So they might go to you, oh, you don't need to get your own building inspection because we've already had one done. Here it is. Now, I'm not saying that these are going to be like dodgy or fraudulent reports, but it allows the vendor to frame things in a certain way that, you know, you're not doing your own due diligence on that. So what happened to us is we relied on the vendor's building report because, as you pointed out earlier, we bought at like peak of the market and there was not a lot of time to get our pre-auction offer in before the actual auction day. So everything was like very rush. And so we thought, okay, we'll just, you know, we'll look over this report and then we'll also get a mate to come around and like crawl around the house a bit and see if it's all right. The mate said, yeah, it's all right. And what the building report said was the cladding is weatherside cladding. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but that's not, I found out, not a good cladding. But it said, oh, but it's in excellent condition and there's no issues, right? And David and I didn't know what weatherside cladding was, so all we read was this is the cladding and it's in excellent condition. So we went, that's great, perfect. However, if we had gotten our own proper building inspection, what the inspector probably would have told us is said, although it's in excellent condition, this is a cladding that has a history of issues, so you may want to consider that before you make an offer. So that really screwed us over, and I don't want that to happen to anyone else.
Don't. Okay, next one. Don't get distracted by cosmetic changes. And I feel like I am definitely someone who would be susceptible to this.
Same.
I walk in and be like, ooh, that looks pretty.
Wow, look at this bench top.
Yeah. Yep, we're sucked right in. Whereas you actually need to be focused on, anyone can chuck up some nice curtains and a lick of paint in a house, but you want to be focused on the bones of the property.
Yes.
Is that in good
Which
condition?
is another good reason to obviously have the building inspection.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think if you do have a mate that's a builder, they could help you with, because it's not necessarily an inspection, but bringing someone along with you that can recognize, like you said, the bones of the house, the things that go beyond just like, this is a nice new kitchen. They can point those things out to you.
Yeah, and I've got mates who are tradespeople, sparkies, plumbers, and they spend enough time on building sites that they can go in and be like, oh, that's not good quality build.
Yeah.
And they can literally look at the room and be like, and point out things that I would never in a million years have noticed. So yeah, taking the mate along and get the building inspection.
There was a house next door to me that when we bought our house, it was basically just a shell. It was like an abandoned project, and they sold it as is. A company bought it and they zhuzhed it up in like 3 or 4 months or something. And so of course I went in to look at it because I'm nosy, and on first glance it looked beautiful and renovated, but when you looked closer there was so many shoddily done things. But they sold it for what they wanted because whoever had bought it was obviously bedazzled by the shiny new things, but it was actually I think quite a poorly done job.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a big don't. Okay, last one. Don't overestimate your budget flexibility. So just because this is a really, really important one, as someone who does financial planning and sees it a lot of the time, and we sit on different sides of this fence. Like Makayla works on the mortgage side, I work on the financial planning side, and you can get mortgage approvals for a heck of a lot more than what makes sense for your situation sometimes.
Yeah, that's totally true. Like the amount that you can afford on paper is very, very often a lot more than you probably in reality can afford.
Or would want to afford.
Or would want to. Because you could have the biggest, fanciest house, but if you literally cannot go anywhere, cannot do anything, you're eating ramen noodles, yeah, you can afford it, but it's not comfortable.
But are you living outside of that? No. Yeah. So make sure that just because you've been given, it's almost like, and this happens all the time with credit cards as well. I don't know if other people have this. The company will approach you and be like, hey, we've just approved a credit limit of X amount, and they keep increasing your credit limit.
$10,000.
Yeah, and you're like, I don't want a 10 grand credit card.
No.
I could, if I got 10 grand in debt, I could not afford to pay that back or whatever it is. So bear in mind that, just because you've got this mortgage approval does not mean you have to spend all of that. And obviously, if it were me, I would sit down and do a nice thorough budget before going ahead with your purchase to make sure that you're going to get to live your life the way you want to live it and afford this house.
You can also check, like, we have a great mortgage calculator on our website, but also all of the banks have mortgage payment calculators. So you might go in your head like, a mortgage of $800,000, that sounds like chump change. I can do it. But if you plug that into the calculator with current interest rates, is that monthly payment actually achievable for you? And then the last thing I'll say on that is when we do get pre-approvals for customers, we often do go to the top of the budget, but we don't necessarily want you to spend that much, like Jess said. The reason we do this is that so if you do find a house that's maybe $20,000 more than what you thought you wanted to spend, you have the option to go there if you want, because it's a lot easier to ask the bank for less money than it is to ask them for more money.
So true. And I think, like, if you're in a position where you're on the fence about, and like this is the type of work that we do as financial advisors, people come to us and be like, we've got this mortgage approval. Do we spend X amount on a house or Y amount on a house? And we can actually very clearly show you the impact of what that decision is going to be. It might be that you need to work an extra 3 years to pay off the extra debt that you're taking on. So if you're not sure and you're at that fork in the road, ask somebody who can show you the type of impact that decision will have.
Right. So some little takeaways from today, because obviously this was a very
tip heavy.
Do it, don't do it episode. But I'd say number one, clarify your priorities, right? You want to be specific about what you want and what is a must-have versus a nice to have, like we said. Number two, to budget for all the costs. So the hidden costs as well, valuations, reports, fees, all of that lovely stuff. Securing a pre-approval, very, very important, especially if you're not in a massive rush. It's good to know what you can afford up front. And number four is
the experts. The experts. Get the experts around you. This is an absolute must. You want people who are professional doing this day in, day out. Just do it. There's no downside.
100%.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening today. Hopefully you found that really useful. Thanks to Partners Life for sponsoring the episode. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.